Hello and welcome to GMBN Tech Ask, where you guys ask us questions using hashtag Ask GMBN Tech down in the comments of any of our videos, and we'll try and get back to you on a show like this. So let's dive in. My first question is from Victor Conrad Fuentes, who says, can I use the torque setting on my cordless drill instead of a dedicated torque wrench? I ride a Marin and have recently started fixing it myself, but my budget for tools isn't exactly immense. Ooh, it's a big old debate. So you want to drill like this, and they have the torque settings usually up here. Now, even if your drill has the right torque settings, because I should imagine a lot of people might have just the sort of higher numbers perhaps, so even if it goes down low enough, these need to be professionally calibrated. It's no dig on works. Most drills won't be very well calibrated when you arrive, and even if they are professionally calibrated, they will go out of whack quite easily, and you won't know. So you could potentially be over torquing or under torquing without knowing it, whereas Torx wrenches are well calibrated. Now, we do often see pro mechanics using things like this in the pits. We've seen it a lot. It's possible that, you know, they have the budget and the effort of sending it off and having it professionally calibrated, or it could just be that they're speeding up the process by doing up some bolts to the point of getting it in contact, but then using a hand torque wrench to properly torque it afterwards, which is what I would do, especially with changing rotor bolts, for example. There's, you know, a lot of bolts, it does speed it up. However, I will say that what drills are also good at is cross-threading things. Sometimes it can be difficult to control the speed with the gun. Sometimes you can get the angle wrong, or it might fall out. And also, in the instance of putting bolts into discs, you should be doing them in the star sequence, for example. And certainly I would do that, a similar pattern for stem bolts as well, because you don't want to go and torque up one bolt and then do the rest, because you're putting too much stress on that particular area. You should be doing them in a star sequence loose and then going round and torquing them in that star sequence afterwards as well. So that's kind of another downside to using a drill, is that you won't get that kind of control on alleviating the tension on the bolts. So I guess the answer is yes and no. You can to speed it up, but personally I would start the bolts by hand, and I would certainly finish them with a torque wrench. So see if there is a torque wrench out there that is within your price range, because I would be using that certainly on carbon if you have a carbon bike. So question 2 is Gustav says, I have a Giant Trance 2016. It seems about outdated because of the steep head angle, and I have a DT Swiss bolt through quick release skewer in the rear. Do you know any ways in which I could change this to make it more modern? And you've gone on to talk about putting 15mm through axle wheels on there and changing the headset. So headset is probably the easiest one to correct. There are a lot of angle set adjusters which can adjust the angle of your head angle, basically. So you've got Wolf Tooth, you've got Works components out there, a number of others. You just need to do a quick shopping search or go to your local bike shop and ask what they stock. Generally you get 2 degrees. You've asked about 3 degrees of change. That's what you want. So you can get 2 in an angle set. And then as you're running a full suspension bike, you can also get offset bushings. Now these are where your rear suspension is mounted, and you can change the orientation of the eyelets, which effectively brings the suspension in, or the mounting system in, and it allows the geometry to change slightly. So generally with offset bushings you get another 1 degree of slack head angle, and you also get to drop your B.A.B as well, and sort of change the reach and effective top tube with all of those things. So if you want to update your geometry and you're particularly looking at that 3 degree, you might have to look at both those options together. However, in terms of your rear axle, if your frame is quick release, then a bolt through is just not going to work. So you might have to stick with that. But you can get some quick releases out there that maybe look a little less dated if that is of an issue to you. Otherwise, if you're starting to change things like skewers to axles, you're changing wheels, front and rear potentially, your forks may potentially be quick release as well. So it's starting to get quite pricey, and you might want to think about the difference between selling your bike and buying a more modern second-hand bike, for example. So yeah, anyway, hopefully that's helped you a little bit. So question 3, Adam Harkin says, I have Shimano Deore drivetrain. I struggle with the removal and fitting of the rear wheel, with holding the cage to give me slack on the chain. Any tips on this? My previous bike had the lockout. Yeah, Shimano can be a little more difficult than, say, SRAM, which does have the arm which you can lock out and make things a little easier. Me personally, I've got a little system that I work with now, in that anytime I want to take the wheel out, firstly, I change all of my gears into my hardest gear, so the smallest sprocket at the back of the cassette. That takes a little bit of the tension off. And say you're in a work stand or you're flipping it upside down, often is easier. What you can do is you can take off the clutch for once. That obviously takes a little tension or the feeling of resistance in your derailleur out, and you can push the body of the derailleur away from where your wheel will be coming out, and that generally works really quickly for me. Once the axle's out, obviously just push that body and the wheel should just pop out. Putting it back in, I think, is slightly more of a fight, but you do get your technique down after a few goes. What I tend to do is to eye up the wheel a little bit and get that smallest cog and the chain to meet up, and you almost rest it on the upper jockey wheel, and then start to push it through. And the body, you can use your hand to sort of move the body of the derailleur out, and you can kind of massage it in together. If it gets a little stuck by the tension of the chain at that point and you just can't quite get that final bit, I tend to grab the arm of the derailleur and just move it, extend it out towards you, and it tends to sort of drop into place. Another way of doing it is, if it's possible, I don't know if you have any chain guides or anything on the front, but you can actually take the chain off of your cassette just momentarily, maybe use something to protect your frame as you do it, and then that will give you even more slack in the chain to move your bike. So just have a little play with it and you'll get your technique down for sure. Okay, question 5, Summit MTB. How do you stop your extreme gears clicking? Okay, so generally the barrel adjuster. So if your gears are clicking and they tend to be in the extreme ends of your cassette, or I would say that's a cable tension problem. And you can fix this with just the barrel adjuster on your shifter, because that fine tunes the tension on that inner cable. Generally, if you look at it, from the cable towards the shifter, the barrel adjuster, if you twist it anti-clockwise, I think of it as lefty-loosey, because that loosens the outer cable and it brings it out and effectively puts more tension on the cable, whereas clockwise, or righty-tighty if you like, brings it in and gives less tension on the inner cable effectively. So now you know that if you put it in a work stand, get your gear up into, say, the hardest or the lowest gear, so your biggest cassette ring, And if you change it down and you're trying to shift it down into a slightly smaller gear and it's not moving, it's potentially there's too much tension on the cable, which is holding the derailleur over into that bigger sprocket. So you're going to need to loosen that tension by going clockwise and bringing the outer cable in. If, for example, you're in your smallest cog and you change all the way down into your hardest gear in your stand, you're pedaling it around, and then you try and move it up one gear and it's just not going, there's not enough tension on the cable to extend the derailleur and pull it up into that slightly bigger gear. So what you need to do is do the whole lefty-loosey so that you bring the outer cable out and put more tension on. And you just want to go 1, 2, maybe 3 clicks as you're pedaling around until it moves. And as soon as it's moved, then it's effectively tuned into place. And then you can drop it back down, check that it comes back up, and just cycle through all the gears, just playing with that barrel adjuster until you're happy it's the best possible setup that you can get. So question 6, finally from Jan Henriot, who says, are the chain wear indicator tools specific for transmission for 1x, 2x or 3x, or with cassettes from 10 to 12? Sort of, I'm going to say. So 11 speed and lower cassettes tend to be pretty good with all chain checkers, I would say. The front doesn't really come into it, whether you've got 1x or 2x is not relevant. The thing with 12 speed is that some of the higher end chains, so for example, I've got an XTR chain here, so higher end chains like XTR, SRAM, Axis, Eagle drive chains, they're not made equally. They're not the same as some of the older or the lower end specs. These rollers or the pins inside are designed in different ways. Some of them may even be slightly loose straight out of the factory in order to make these chains better at changing, at faster rolling. Basically, they're designed to be so high performance, they're designed differently. So when we think about if, for example, the rollers are slightly loose, if you used a 2-point chain checker, then what you do is you drop it in and then you're using this lever to push in and check the wear. And by doing so, you're using those 2 points in opposing directions, and you could effectively stretch them into their loose position and give yourself a false reading. So generally, something like this that has a 3-point checking system is much better for 12 speed and higher end ones, and the bigger the better. Generally, I find it gives a better reading as it takes more of an average of a longer point of your chain, if that makes sense. But the reason this is better for those higher end chains is because you effectively drop 2 in and then you hold them like this and you cause tension. So you're not pushing away these 2 points anymore. You are getting this point to the back of a pin and measuring those lengths. So as you can see, this is not worn. This is not a worn chain. However, if I were to let go of that slackness and not cause it to go to the back of the roller, it actually fits in and it gives me a false reading. It would, if I were to do it with 2 points, it would say it was worn, but it's not worn at all. Yeah, long answer to that, but the short answer is if you have 12 speed or higher end chains, get a 3-point checker. And that's all we have time for. So thank you for watching, and use hashtag Ask GMBN Tech if you have any of your own questions. Thanks.